Captain Jake Morrison stood at the window of his ship and watched the stars. He had seen these same stars for 30 years, but today they looked different. Today they were no longer home. The message from Earth had come 3 hours ago, and Jake still could not believe it. Humanity was being kicked out of the Galactic Federation. All humans had to leave Federation space within 3 months. Jake turned to look at his crew. They were all working quietly, but he could see the worry in their eyes. Lieutenant Amy Johnson was checking the navigation systems for the 3rd time. She kept looking at the star maps like she was trying to memorize them. Engineer Rick Davis was fixing things that did not need fixing. His hands shook slightly as he worked. Even old Sergeant Bill Parker, who had fought in the border wars, was quiet today. The Federation had been humanity's dream for 200 years. When the first alien ships arrived at Earth in 2187, humans thought they had finally found their place in the universe. The aliens were peaceful and smart. They had technology that seemed like magic. They invited humans to join their great alliance of worlds. It seemed too good to be true. Maybe it was. Dr. Lisa Carter was in her lab when the news came. She had spent 15 years studying alien plants and animals. Her work helped humans understand how to live alongside other species. She had friends among the Zephyrians who looked like tall blue birds. She had worked with the rock-like Altarians who spoke in musical tones. Now all of that was ending. Lisa sat down hard in her chair and stared at her research. 15 years of her life were in these files. Studies of alien ecosystems, reports on interspecies cooperation, plans for new colonies where humans and aliens could work together. All of it was worthless now. The Council of Seven had decided that humans were too dangerous to keep around. The vote had been 6-1. Only the Altarians had spoken for humanity. The others all agreed that humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too emotional. The Draknari said humans fought like wild animals. The Vextari said human thoughts were too chaotic for their hive minds to understand. The Luxions claimed that human emotions interfered with logical decision-making. Commander Ryan Blake was reading the evacuation orders when his aide brought him coffee. The coffee was cold, but Ryan drank it anyway. He needed something normal in this very abnormal day. The orders were clear. Every human colony, research station, trading post, and military base outside the Sol system had to be abandoned. Every human ship had to leave Federation space. Any human caught in Federation territory after the deadline would be arrested. Ryan had commanded the human fleet in Federation space for 8 years. His ships had kept the peace between coiling alien species. His crews had rescued thousands of beings from disasters and attacks. His people had died protecting Federation worlds. None of that mattered now. The Federation wanted them gone. President Helen Adams was in her office when the alien ambassadors delivered their message. She listened without speaking as they explained their decision. Humans were incompatible with peaceful coexistence. Humans caused more problems than they solved. The galaxy would be safer without them. Helen waited until the ambassadors left before she allowed herself to show emotion. She was angry, but she was also proud. Proud of what humanity had accomplished. Proud of the colonies they had built and the friends they had made. Proud of the humans who had given their lives for the Federation. The aliens could take away their membership, but they could not take away their dignity. The Draknari commander. Sector watched the human ships prepare to leave from his command center. He felt satisfied. Humans were too wild, too unpredictable. They made decisions based on feelings instead of logic. They fought with passion instead of discipline. In battle, they ignored orders and did whatever they thought was right. This made them dangerous allies and dangerous enemies. Sector had fought alongside humans in the Outer Rim conflicts. He had seen them charge into hopeless battles to save a single wounded soldier. He had watched them refuse direct orders to abandon civilians. He had seen them win fights they should have lost by doing things no sane warrior would try. This was not how civilized beings behaved. The human evacuation took 2 months. Ship after ship loaded with families, belongings, and dreams left for Earth. The colonists on New Geneva were the last to go. They had lived there for 60 years and built beautiful cities in the purple forests. Now they had to leave it all behind. Jake Morrison's ship was part of the final convoy. As they crossed the boundary into human space, he looked back one last time. Behind them was everything humanity had worked for since first contact. Ahead was uncertainty. Jake did not know what would happen next, but he knew one thing. The aliens thought they were getting rid of a problem. They had no idea what they were really doing. Dr. Carter stood next to Jake at the window. She was carrying a small plant in a pot. It was a friendship flower that the Altarians had given her years ago. She had managed to keep it alive in Earth conditions. It was the only alien thing she was allowed to bring home. The Federation worlds grew smaller behind them until they were just points of light. Then even those disappeared. Humanity was alone again, just like they had been before first contact. But they were not the same species that had greeted the aliens 200 years ago. They had learned and grown and changed. They had tasted the stars and made friends among the cosmos. Now they were heading home to lick their wounds and figure out what came next. The aliens thought they had solved the problem by getting rid of the humans. They thought there would be no consequences for their actions. They were wrong about that. They were very wrong. 50 years had passed since the Great Exodus. Dr. Susan Martinez stood in her laboratory on Luna Station looking at the quantum communicator she had just finished building. It was the size of a refrigerator and hummed with barely contained energy. More importantly, it worked without using any Federation relay networks. For the first time in decades, humanity could talk to their distant colonies instantly. Susan wiped sweat from her forehead and smiled. The Federation had cut off all communication links when they expelled humanity. They thought this would keep humans isolated and weak. Instead, it had forced humans to find new ways to stay connected. The quantum communicator was just the beginning. Human science had jumped forward by centuries in just 50 years. Engineer Paul Rodriguez was working in the asteroid belt when he got word that Project Homecoming had succeeded. He floated in zero gravity inside the massive construction facility he had designed. Around him, robots and humans worked together to build the things that would make humanity truly independent. The project had one simple goal: make sure humans never needed anyone else to survive. Paul looked out at the ships being built in the orbital yards. They were sleek and powerful, unlike anything the Federation had ever seen. Human engineers had taken everything they learned from alien technology and made it better. The new fusion reactors produced 4 times more power than Federation standard. The hulls were made from smart metals that could repair themselves. The computers could think and learn and adapt. Admiral Karen Foster stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched her fleet conduct training exercises. The ships moved through space like a school of fish, each one responding to the others without any central command. This was the human way of fighting. No rigid formations or predetermined tactics, just smart people making good decisions under pressure. Karen had been building this fleet in secret for 20 years. Every ship incorporated lessons learned from their time in the Federation. But more than that, they incorporated lessons learned from being human. The ships were designed to be flexible and adaptable. They could change their configuration in minutes depending on what was needed. Fighter today, transport tomorrow, research. Vessel next week, the crews were trained the same way. Every sailor could do multiple jobs. Every officer could think independently. Every ship could operate alone if necessary. This was not how the Federation militaries worked. They preferred specialized ships with specialized crews following specialized orders. Humans preferred to be ready for anything. Tony Bennett sat in his study on Mars writing his latest essay. He was not the old singer with the same name, but a philosopher who had become humanity's voice during the isolation years. His writings about cooperation and diversity were smuggled into Federation space by friendly Altarian traders. Young aliens across the galaxy were reading his words and asking questions their elders did not want to answer. Tony wrote about the difference between unity and uniformity. The Federation demanded that all species think and act the same way. This was not true cooperation, but forced conformity. Real cooperation meant working together while staying true to yourself. It meant using differences as strengths instead of trying to eliminate them. His essays were banned in most Federation worlds, but that only made them more popular. Underground networks of young Zephyrians, Altarians, and even some Drachnari were passing around copies. They were starting to wonder if the old ways were really the best ways. They were starting to think that maybe the humans had been right about some things. Back in Federation space, cracks were starting to show. Without human mediators, conflicts between species escalated faster and lasted longer. The Zephyrians and Drachnari had fought 3 border wars in the past decade. Each time, the fighting was more brutal and the peace negotiations took longer. The Vextari had become more aggressive in their expansion. They were claiming systems that other species had explored first, without human researchers offering alternative solutions. The Vextari saw no choice but to take what they needed by force. Their hive mind could not understand why other species were upset about this. Ambassador Kethver of the Zephyrians sat in his office reading reports about the latest border incident. A Drachnari patrol had attacked a Zephyrian science vessel, claiming it was in their territory. The Zephyrians said they were in neutral space. Both sides were demanding satisfaction. Both sides were preparing for war. Kethver remembered when humans would have handled this situation. They would have sent a diplomat who could talk to both species. They would have found a compromise that let everyone save face. They would have suggested a joint patrol or a shared research project that turned enemies into partners. But there were no humans to call now. He had been one of the leaders who voted to expel humanity from the Federation. At the time, it seemed like the right decision. Humans were too emotional, too unpredictable. They made decisions based on feelings instead of logic. They refused to follow proper procedures. They caused more problems than they solved, but now Kethver was not so sure. The problems were still there, but no one knew how to solve them anymore. The Federation Council meetings had become shouting matches. Species that had worked together for centuries were becoming suspicious of each other. The old unity was breaking. Apart, Dr. Maria Lopez worked in her laboratory on Earth, studying the reports that smugglers brought from Federation space. She was humanity's leading expert on alien technology, but now she studied alien problems instead. The reports painted a picture of a Federation in decline. Trade was down, scientific progress had slowed. Military tensions were rising. Maria understood what was happening. The Federation had been built on the idea that all species should think and act the same way. This worked when everyone agreed about what that way should be. But without humans around to suggest alternatives and ask uncomfortable questions, the system was becoming rigid and brittle. She wrote reports for the human government about what she saw. The Federation was not adapting to change. They were not finding new solutions to old problems. They were not growing or learning. They were just getting older and more set in their ways. This made them vulnerable to new threats. Captain Steve Hamilton commanded a long-range scout ship that operated near the border of Federation space. His mission was officially to explore new star systems for human colonization. Unofficially, he was keeping an eye on their former allies. He had been doing this job for 10 years, and he had watched the Federation slowly fall apart. Steve remembered what it was like to be part of something bigger than just humanity. He remembered the excitement of meeting new species and learning new things. He remembered working together with aliens to solve problems that no one species could handle alone. Those had been good times, but he also remembered the frustration of being told that human ways were wrong. The endless meetings where alien bureaucrats criticized human methods. The regulations that made no sense for human psychology. The growing pressure to conform or leave. Maybe the isolation was better than that. His ship detected a distress signal from deep in Federation space. It was weak and garbled, but clearly a call for help. Steve looked at his instruments and calculated the distance. He could reach the signal in 6 hours. But responding would mean entering Federation space illegally. Any human caught in Federation territory could be arrested or worse. Steve thought about it for exactly 30 seconds before ordering his crew to change course. This was what humans did. They helped people who needed help. They took risks for strangers. They did the right thing even when it was dangerous or stupid. The Federation had called this emotional and unpredictable. Steve called it being human. The Devourer fleet came from the darkness between galaxies without warning. They appeared at the edge of Federation space like a nightmare made real. The first worlds to die were mining colonies on the rim. The few survivors who escaped told stories that no one wanted to believe. Ships made of living metal that ate entire planets. Swarms of machines that turned stars into fuel for their endless hunger. Federation. First Admiral Zekthal of the Draknari received the reports in his command center on the fortress world of Keth Prime. He read them twice before accepting what he was seeing. An unknown enemy had destroyed 17 systems in 6 days. The attack pattern showed intelligence and planning. This was not some natural disaster or accident. This was war. Zekthal called an emergency meeting of the Federation Defense Council. Representatives from all 7 member species gathered in the Great Hall where decisions of war and peace were made. The holographic displays showed the expanding zone of destruction. Red markers indicated dead systems. Yellow markers showed worlds under attack. The red zone was growing larger every hour. The Zephyrian representative fluttered her feathers nervously as she spoke. Her people were explorers and diplomats, not warriors. They had only a small fleet of research ships and trading vessels. The Altarians were even worse prepared. Their ships were built for mining and construction, not combat. The Luxions had powerful energy weapons, but their ships were slow and hard to maneuver. Only the Draknari had a real military fleet. But even their mighty warships seemed tiny compared to the enemy forces shown in the intelligence reports. The Devourers traveled in swarms of thousands of ships. Each individual vessel was larger than a Draknari battlecruiser, and there were dozens of these swarms heading toward the heart of Federation space. The meeting quickly turned into an argument. Each species wanted to fight in their own way using their own tactics. The Draknari favored direct assault with heavy weapons. The Zephyrians wanted to use hit-and-run attacks with fast ships. The Vextari insisted that only coordinated hive mind tactics could succeed against such numbers. The Luxions wanted to focus purely on energy-based weapons. Dr. Maria Lopez sat in her laboratory on Luna Station studying the fragmentary data that had reached human space. Her team had been analyzing the Devour technology for weeks, trying to understand how it worked. What they found was terrifying and fascinating at the same time. The Devourers were not just destroying worlds for resources, they were consuming information. Every civilization they destroyed made them smarter and more adaptable. They learned from each battle and incorporated new technologies into their fleet. They were not just conquerors but students, growing stronger with each victory. Maria could see the pattern in the attack data. The first Devourer ships had been crude and simple, but each new wave was more sophisticated than the last. They were adapting to Federation weapons and tactics in real time. By the time the main fleet reached the core worlds, they would be unstoppable. She sent her analysis to the human government and received orders to continue monitoring the situation. Officially, humanity was neutral in this conflict. The Federation had expelled them and cut off all contact. Why should humans risk their lives to save the people who had rejected them? But Maria knew that if the Federation fell, humanity would be next. Captain Steve Hamilton was returning from a routine patrol when he intercepted the distress call. It was coming from a Zephyrian research station in the Kepler 442 system. The message was desperate and broken by interference. The station was under attack by unknown enemies. Over 50,000 civilians were trapped with no way to escape. Steve looked at his instruments and calculated the odds. His ship, the UES Wanderer, was fast but lightly armed. The research station was deep in Federation space, far from any human base. If he went to help, he would be violating the exile order. If he was caught, he could be imprisoned or executed. If he ignored the call, 50,000 beings would die. His crew gathered on the bridge waiting for orders. They all knew the risks. They all knew what the right thing to do was. Lieutenant Nancy Green spoke for all of them when she said they should go. Sergeant Pete Johnson started plotting a course before Steve even gave the order. This was what humans did. They helped people who needed help. Even when those people had treated them badly, the journey to Kepler 442 took 8 hours at maximum speed. Along the way, they monitored Federation military communications. The reports were grim. The Devourer fleet had broken through the outer defenses. Dozens of worlds were falling every day. The Federation forces were retreating toward the core systems, leaving the rim colonies to fend for themselves. When they reached the research station, Steve could see why the defenders were losing. The Devourer ships looked like nothing he had ever seen before. They were organic and mechanical at the same time, constantly shifting and changing shape. They moved through space like living creatures, hunting in packs like predators. The research station was under siege by 6 Devourer vessels. Each one was the size of a space station but moved with the grace of a fighter craft. They were slowly tearing the station apart, consuming the metal and equipment to fuel their own growth. Emergency shuttles launched from the station only to be caught and consumed before they could escape. Steve ordered his crew to battle stations and began planning the rescue. The conventional approach would be to fight the Devourer ships directly, but Steve was not conventional. He was human. He looked at the situation and saw opportunities that a Federation officer would never consider. The rescue operation took 4 hours and violated every rule of military engagement. Instead of fighting the Devourers head-on, Steve used hit-and-run tactics. His ship would appear suddenly, grab a shuttle full of refugees, and disappear before the enemy could react. When the Devourers adapted to this tactic, Steve switched to something completely different. He used the station's own equipment against the attackers. He overloaded the fusion reactors to create electromagnetic pulses that disrupted Devourer sensors. He turned the mining lasers into weapons and the cargo transporters into missile launchers. He even used the station's gravity generators to create artificial black holes that trapped enemy ships. The Devourers tried to adapt, but Steve changed tactics faster than they could learn. This was the human advantage. They did not follow rigid plans or predetermined strategies. They improvised and adapted and found new solutions under pressure. They fought with chaos and creativity instead of order and logic. In the end, Steve managed to evacuate 47,000 civilians from the doomed station. It was not everyone, but it was more than anyone thought possible. The rescued beings included scientists, engineers, families, and children from 6 different species. All of them owed their lives to a human captain who had no obligation to help them. The news of the rescue spread quickly through both Federation and human space. Ambassador Kethver heard about it while meeting with other Federation leaders. He felt a mixture of gratitude and shame. Gratitude that the humans had saved so many lives. Shame that his own people had not been able to do the same. The rescue also sent a message to the Devourer fleet. For the first time since their arrival, they had been outmaneuvered and defeated. It was only a small victory, but it proved that the invaders were not invincible. They could be beaten by beings who thought differently than they did. Dr. Lopez received the full combat data from Steve's ship and studied it carefully. The information confirmed her worst fears about Devourer adaptation capabilities. But it also revealed something hopeful. The enemy adapted to organized resistance but seemed confused by chaotic tactics. They could counter logical strategies but struggled with unpredictable human behavior. She immediately began working on new recommendations for fighting the Devourers. The key was not to give them time to adapt. Hit them fast with constantly changing tactics. Never fight the same way twice. Use their own adaptation ability against them by feeding them false information and contradictory strategies. President Charles Wright read Maria's report in his office on Earth. The recommendations were clear. Humanity had to enter the war if they wanted to survive. The Federation could not defeat the Devourers using conventional tactics. Only human chaos and unpredictability could tip the balance. The question was whether humanity should help the People who had cast them out. Charles looked out his window at the lights of New Washington. Somewhere out there in the darkness, an ancient enemy was consuming worlds and civilizations. Soon they would turn their attention to human space. When that happened, humanity would face the same choice the Federation was facing now: fight together or die alone. The Devourer fleet had consumed half the Federation when President Charles Wright made his decision. He stood before the Human Congressional Assembly in Geneva and spoke words that would change the course of galactic history. Humanity would deploy its fleet to Federation space. They would fight alongside the beings who had cast them out 50 years ago. The debate that followed was fierce. Senator Patricia Davis argued that humanity owed the Federation nothing. They had been expelled and humiliated. Let the aliens face their own extinction without human help. Senator George Clark countered that innocent beings were dying. Children and families were being consumed by machines. Humanity could not stand by and watch genocide happen. Admiral Karen Foster received her orders while her fleet conducted exercises in the outer solar system. She was to take the entire human battle fleet into Federation space and engage the Devourer forces. It would be the largest human military operation since the colonial wars. It would also be completely illegal under Federation law. Karen looked at the tactical displays showing her ships. 50 years of isolation had produced a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The vessels seemed to shimmer and shift as their adaptive hulls responded to different conditions. Each ship was a masterpiece of human engineering, designed to be flexible and unpredictable. Her flagship was the UES Defiance, a massive battlecruiser that could reconfigure itself for different mission types. In combat mode, it bristled with weapons and defensive systems. In exploration mode, it became a mobile research platform. In rescue mode, it could carry thousands of refugees. Right now, it was preparing for the deadliest mission in human history. Engineer Rachel Thompson worked in the weapon laboratories deep inside Luna Station. She had been studying the Devourer adaptation problem for months. The enemy learned from every encounter and developed countermeasures for every weapon used against them. Traditional military doctrine said to find one perfect weapon and mass-produce it. Rachel had a different idea. Instead of one perfect weapon, she designed modular systems that could be reconfigured in seconds. A laser cannon could become a particle beam or a plasma projector or an exotic matter disruptor. The key was to change faster than the enemy could adapt. Never give them time to learn your tricks. Her workshop was filled with prototype weapons that looked more like building blocks than military hardware. Each module could connect to any other module in dozens of different ways. A human weapons officer could create entirely new weapon types in the middle of battle. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Dr. Carl Johnson led the team of rescued Federation scientists working at the Human Research Facility on Titan. Among them was Dr. Veltar, a Zephyrian physicist who had been studying Devourer technology since the first attacks. Together they had made a breakthrough that could change everything. The Devourers were not just consuming matter and energy. They were consuming information itself. Every civilization they destroyed became part of their collective knowledge. Every weapon used against them was analyzed and countered. Every tactical doctrine was studied and defeated. This was why they seemed unstoppable. But there was a weakness. The Devourers were programmed to adapt to organized resistance. Their algorithms expected enemies to follow logical patterns and use consistent strategies. They had never encountered a species that thrived on chaos and unpredictability. They had never fought humans. Carl shared this discovery with the Federation scientists who had been working on the problem for months. Dr. Kethmal of the Altarians was amazed by the human approach to warfare. Where other species saw chaos as a weakness, humans saw it as a strength. Where others demanded order and discipline, humans encouraged creativity and improvisation. The first major test came at the Kepler 442 system, where Captain Steve Hamilton had rescued the research station. Survivors. A Devourer fleet of 300 ships was consuming the remains of the system. Admiral Foster's advance force of 50 human vessels moved to intercept them. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. The human ships attacked without any apparent coordination. Each captain chose their own targets and tactics. Some ships fought alone while others formed temporary groups that dissolved and reformed constantly. It looked like complete chaos, but it was controlled chaos. The Devourers tried to adapt, but could not find a pattern to counter. Every time they developed a response to one ship's tactics, that ship would switch to something completely different. When they tried to predict human behavior, the humans would do something unexpected. It was like trying to catch smoke with their claws. Commander Sector of the Drachnary watched the battle from his command ship and could not believe what he was seeing. The humans were winning through pure unpredictability. Their tactics made no sense according to military doctrine. They broke formation whenever they felt like it. They ignored orders from their own commanders. They fought like individuals instead of a unit, but it worked. The Devourer fleet was being torn apart by opponents who refused to fight like civilized beings. Human ships would appear from unexpected directions using weapons that had never been seen before. They would attack the strongest enemy units instead of the weakest. They would retreat when they were winning and advance when they were losing. Sector had fought alongside humans during the border conflicts decades ago. He had criticized their chaotic methods and emotional decision-making. Now he was seeing those same qualities save the galaxy. The humans were not fighting despite their chaos. They were fighting because of it. The Battle of Kepler 442 lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Devourer fleet. Not a single human ship was lost. The news spread through Federation space like wildfire. For the first time since the invasion began, the enemy had been defeated decisively. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the UES Liberty during the battle and saw things he would never forget. He watched Lieutenant Amy Johnson pilot their ship through a maze of enemy fire while laughing with pure joy. He saw engineer Rick Davis invent new weapons configurations in real time as the battle progressed. He witnessed ordinary humans do extraordinary things under impossible pressure. After the battle, Jake found himself thinking about the Federation's decision to expel humanity. They had called humans too aggressive and unpredictable. They had said human emotions interfered with logical thinking. They had claimed humanity was incompatible with civilized behavior. All of those criticisms were true, and all of them were exactly what the galaxy needed right now. Dr. Lisa Carter arrived at the battlefield aboard a hospital ship to treat the wounded and study Devourer technology. She found wreckage from enemy vessels that showed clear signs of adaptive evolution. The ships had been trying to counter human tactics even as they died, but they had run out of time to complete the adaptation process. Lisa examined the Devourer computer cores and found something remarkable. The enemy artificial intelligence was sophisticated beyond anything the Federation had developed. It could process millions of variables simultaneously and develop countermeasures for any threat. But it was also rigid and predictable. It followed algorithms and logic trees that could be manipulated by someone who understood how it worked. Humans did not fight with algorithms. They fought with intuition and emotion and wild inspiration. They made decisions based on feelings that could not be quantified or predicted. They did things that made no logical sense but somehow worked anyway. This was their secret weapon against an enemy that relied on logic and adaptation. The victory at Kepler 442 was just the beginning. News of the human fleet's arrival spread through both Federation and Devourer networks. The enemy began diverting resources to analyze this new threat. The Federation species began to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this war. Ambassador Kethver sent a secret message to the human government through Altarian intermediaries. The Federation formally requested human assistance against the Devourer threat. They offered to lift the exile order and restore humanity's membership in the galactic community. All they asked in return was help against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. President Wright read the message in his office and smiled grimly. The same beings who had called humanity too dangerous to live among civilized species were now begging for human help. The irony was not lost on him. Humanity's greatest weaknesses had become the galaxy's greatest hope, but Wright also knew that this was bigger than politics or revenge. The Devourers would not stop with the Federation. They would consume every world and every civilization they could find. Humanity would have to fight them eventually. Better to fight alongside allies than to face them alone, he drafted a response that would be remembered for centuries. Humanity accepted the Federation's request for aid, not because they owed the Federation anything, but because it was the right thing to do. The message ended with words that would become legendary. We come not as conquerors, but as partners. We fight not for glory, but for survival. We are human, and we do not abandon those who need help. The battle for the Federation core lasted 6 months and changed everything. Admiral Corinne Foster stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance as human and alien ships fought side by side against the Devourer swarms. It was not the old Federation she was fighting to save. It was something new, something better, something that had never existed before. The combined fleet moved through space like a living thing. Human ships provided the chaos and unpredictability that kept the Devourers confused. Draknari battleships delivered devastating firepower at close range. Zephyrian scouts provided intelligence and coordination. Altarian support vessels kept everyone supplied and repaired. For the first time in galactic history, different species were truly working together instead of just coexisting. Commander Sector of the Draknari found himself taking orders from Captain Jake Morrison during the assault on the Devourer staging area. 6 months ago, this would have been unthinkable. Draknari commanders did not take orders from anyone outside their own species, but Jake had proven himself in dozens of battles. His chaotic human tactics had saved Sector S life more than once. The humans did not fight to restore the old Federation. They fought to create something entirely new. Dr. Lisa Carter had returned to Federation space not as an exile but as an architect. Her new diversity protocol established that effective cooperation required preserving differences, not eliminating them. Each species would contribute their unique strengths without being forced to conform to a single standard. Lisa worked with representatives from every species to design the framework for what would become the Galactic Alliance. The old Federation had demanded uniformity. Everyone had to think the same way, act the same way, fight the same way. The Alliance would celebrate diversity. Different approaches to the same problem were seen as advantages, not obstacles. The diversity protocol was tested in every battle against the Devourers. Human ships would attack without coordination, confusing the enemy adaptation systems. Draknari vessels would provide steady, disciplined firepower. Zephyrian fighters would scout and harass. Altarian engineers would improvise repairs and modifications in the middle of combat. Each species did what they did best. Engineer Paul Rodriguez led the reconstruction effort on worlds liberated from Devourer control. The old Federation would have sent and standardized construction teams using approved methods and materials. Paul brought together engineers from every species and told them to find better ways to do things. The results were revolutionary. Zephyrian architects designed buildings that could fly if they needed to evacuate quickly. Draknari metallurgists created materials that got stronger under stress. Human programmers wrote software that could think and learn and adapt. Altarian biotechnicians grew living ships that could heal themselves. The technology that emerged from this cooperation was beyond anything any single species could have developed alone. Ships that could reconfigure themselves for any mission. Worlds that could defend themselves against any attack. Communication networks that connected the entire galaxy in real time. It was the promise of the Federation finally fulfilled. The Devourers were ultimately defeated not by superior firepower but by superior adaptability. They could adapt to any single strategy or weapon system. But they could not adapt to constantly changing tactics used by species that thought in completely different ways. Every time they learned to counter human chaos, Draknari discipline would surprise them. When they adapted to Draknari methods, Zephyrian creativity would catch them off guard. Captain Steve Hamilton commanded a joint task force during the final assault on the Devourer homeworld. His crew included humans, Drachneri, Zephyrians, and Altarians working together as if they had trained together for years. They had not. They had simply learned to trust each other and use their differences as strengths. The Devourer homeworld was a massive machine the size of a planet, surrounded by millions of ships and defensive systems. The old Federation would have launched a direct assault with overwhelming force. Steve had a different idea. He sent his mixed species teams in using completely different approaches simultaneously. Human teams used stealth and misdirection to infiltrate the defenses. Drachneri warriors launched frontal assaults that drew attention away from the infiltrators. Zephyrian pilots conducted hit-and-run attacks that kept the enemy off balance. Altarian engineers sabotaged critical systems from the inside. The Devourers could not adapt to all these different approaches at once. The destruction of the Devourer homeworld marked the end of the invasion and the beginning of a new age. In the aftermath, Ambassador Kethver stood before the newly formed Galactic Alliance Council and formally apologized to humanity for their expulsion 50 years earlier. "We feared your chaos," he said to the human delegates. "We called it dangerous and unpredictable. We thought it would destroy the peace we had built. We were wrong. Your chaos saved us all. We mistook your greatest strength for your greatest weakness." The new Galactic Alliance was founded on principles that humanity had tried to teach from the beginning. Unity through diversity, cooperation without conformity, strength through difference. Each member species maintained their independence and their unique culture while contributing to the collective defense and advancement of all. Dr. Carl Johnson became the first director of interspecies research, leading teams of scientists from every Alliance world. His mandate was simple: find better ways to do things by combining different approaches. The old Federation had discouraged this kind of cooperation. The Alliance made it the foundation of everything they did. Tony Bennett's writings became required reading in Alliance schools. His essays about diversity and cooperation were translated into every known language. Children grew up learning that differences were valuable, that chaos could be controlled, that the best solutions came from bringing different perspectives together. President Charles Wright signed the Alliance Charter in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. The document established humanity as a founding member of the new galactic government with full rights and privileges. It was a far cry from the exile order that had been signed in the same building 50 years earlier. Admiral Foster kept her fleet on patrol along the galactic rim, watching for new threats. The Devourers had been defeated, but the galaxy was vast and full of unknowns. The Alliance would need defenders who could adapt to any challenge. Humans and their chaotic methods would always have a place in that defense. Rachel Thompson's modular weapon systems became standard equipment throughout the Alliance fleet. But more than that, her approach to problem-solving spread to every field of endeavor. Instead of looking for one perfect solution, Alliance scientists and engineers developed flexible systems that could be reconfigured for different needs. The galaxy was no longer divided by differences. It was united by them. Each crisis was met, not with rigid doctrine, but with creative solutions from beings who thought in different ways. Each challenge became an opportunity to discover new possibilities through cooperation. As Admiral Foster stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance years later, she reflected on the irony of it all. Humanity had been cast out for being too different, too aggressive, too unpredictable. Those same qualities had saved the galaxy from extinction and created a civilization greater than anything that had come before. The Federation had forced the humans to leave, thinking there would be no consequence for their actions. They had been wrong about that. The consequence was not revenge or conquest. The consequence was that humanity had become exactly what the galaxy needed, not overlords or rulers, but bridges between different ways of thinking and being the greatest. Threats were defeated not by conformity but by the courage to remain true to who you were, even when the rest of the galaxy told you that who you were was wrong. Humanity had learned that lesson in exile. Now they were teaching it to everyone else. The galaxy had never been more diverse, more chaotic, or more alive. And at the heart of it all was the simple truth that humans had always known. Differences were not weaknesses to be eliminated, but strengths to be celebrated. The Alliance would face many challenges in the years to come, but they would face them together, united not despite their differences but because of them.